So I'm going to talk everybody through the Terania-Keerrong flood observation project, which we actually started in February earlier this year. So first of all, Anna's already mentioned, but thank you to the Northern Rivers Community Foundation who provided a grant which allowed me actually to start doing this project. And then also thank you to a lot of people in the room actually who participated in the study, because without you we wouldn't have been able to do this at all. So what did we do? First of all, we asked people to participate in an online survey and to send in photos which showed the extent and the peak of where floodwaters were either in their house or on their property. And then I went around the catchment and interviewed people, documented their stories. We then walked through the landscape and measured where the floodwater has actually come to on the property. Subsequently, Ken has actually been out with his proper surveying equipment and professionally recorded those levels. And then we've made a really big map through the whole catchment and documented where the actual water, the extent and the peak of that flood came through our entire catchment. So the plan now is to share that knowledge in this meeting so that we can start to build resilience within the community. I'm going to very, very quickly blitz through some of those survey results. First of all, it's a really, really diverse community. We've got people who've lived here for years, 73 years. The gentleman is in the room and he has a lot of flood knowledge. He's lived through a lot of floods, as is his family, and they've passed all of that knowledge down to him. But at the same time, we've got a lot of new people who've only lived here for 15 months. They've had no prior flood knowledge. They didn't experience 2017. They don't know how quickly the creeks rise, where the cut-off points are on the road, where the exit routes are, how long that floodwater stays for, how long it takes for the bridges to be cleared again. And those people in this community are very, very, very vulnerable. Most people look to the ABC and to the BOM for information. They are the most trusted sources. But what we're finding is in these events, which are very timely, things are happening very quickly, information is not coming through fast enough in those sources of information. So people are turning to Facebook, they're going on hookups, they're calling their neighbours if the phones are working to find out what's happening upstream. And people have actually found the Channon hookups to be really, really, really important for finding out that timely information. When it came to the severity of this flood, we just didn't expect it. Most people were preparing for 2017. And as a result, there was quite a lot of loss in this community. How did we prepare? We prepared to be isolated because that's what we're used to happening. So we stocked up on food, we got supplies, we chatted with neighbours, but nobody prepared to be inundated. Not one single person in this community had an evacuation kit. Most people don't even have an evacuation plan when it comes to floods either. But there is a really, really strong desire to learn what do we need to do, how do we need to be prepared, and what should that plan look like. If we had more information as a community, we would have stocked up, on more food, we would have got more medication, we would have got fuel. Fuel was a really big thing that kept getting repeated. People would have moved livestock, people lost livestock, they would have moved their possessions, they would have evacuated well in advance, they would have got a CB radio, they would have got a generator, but they would have also let people know, family living far away. By the time everybody was trapped, comms were down and they couldn't let their loved one know that they were safe. So after we did the survey, I went and visited a lot of people. I covered high up in Wine, Dunoon, a lot of time in Terania Creek where I live myself, and then also a lot of time in the Keerrong Valley, and that was a real eye-opener for me personally. Oops, one slide was missed there. So the new people in this valley, they were really shocked. They actually didn't even know that it flooded here. They just thought it was Lismore, just the CBD. And then there were people that have lived here for years, and this kind of a little bit of a false sense of security. Well, we saw what happened in 2017. That's the worst it's ever been, and that's what people had actually prepared for. But then there were other people in the community who'd really been observing. There'd been floods here on the Thursday previously, and we'd had some members of the community who'd called council. They were very concerned. The drains were blocked, the culverts were full, the landscape was saturated. And there wasn't a sense that people were actually trying to give out warnings from Thursday, but Further downstream, it wasn't heated. People were still kind of playing bowls on the Saturday. Nobody was really moving anything. And I think those members of the community actually became very, very frustrated. So as Annie already touched upon, high up in the catchment, we had Ken, who was recording the rainfall. He recorded 933 millimeters, but that's underestimated because he couldn't get out quick enough to empty his rain gauge. So it would have been a lot more than that in a very short period of time. And in 2.5 hours during the intensity, 130 millimeters were measured. And then Ken's like, well, what do I do with that information? I really need to be passing that on. This is really important information, and we didn't have the systems in place. And then who does he call? And then if he goes to call someone, well, actually the phone line's down, the landline's not working. High up in the catchment, we knew, and we didn't have the means to let people know further down what was happening. And then so lower down in the valley, kind of in the Channon, in Keerrong, people are looking at the bomb, they're looking at the Creek River data, it's saying it's steady. Okay, so we don't need to evacuate yet, it's steady. But then they're looking outside and it's rising really fast, and there's little dips in the landscape, and if you don't make that decision to get out there and then you're trapped and you're stuck. So then at 3 o'clock in the morning, people in the Channon, Keerrong, they start getting the evacuation orders from Rouse, who are calling on the phone, telling people that they need to evacuate, water's coming over the spillway. But by this point, it's already too late. People are trapped and they can't leave. And then at 6 o'clock in the morning, the wider region starts to get text messages, evacuation orders, the dam is basically going to breach. This was really confusing because people lower down in the valley, people actually in harm's way, they were getting the message that they were trapped. They've already been told there's no rescue, nobody can come to help. But then people higher up in the catchment who think they live above the dam are starting to get these messages. And it's like, well, what do I do? You can't get on the internet to check your location, and it caused real confusion. And I think it added even more to the stress and the anxiety that the community were already experiencing. So the flood height for the Channon for 2022 was 14.32 meters. That's 2.18 meters higher than 2017. And it peaked 3 times. One around about 3 o'clock in the morning, then again at around about 9 o'clock in the morning, pretty much to the same levels as earlier in the night. And then it peaked again, not to the same level, but around about 12:45. So for our community, major flooding. There were lives endangered, people trapped in their houses for up to 2 days in a meter's worth of water, people on their tinnies for 48 hours. We have lost homes in the valley, lots of assets have been destroyed, and there's a great deal of trauma. There's some really vulnerable people who live here alone and just didn't know what to do and didn't have any help. And then as a result, we've also got residents that have now left. Higher up in the catchment, major landslides. It also resulted in loss of homes, fear for people's safety, isolated communities, especially on multiple occupancies, restricted access. People high up couldn't get out for 10 days. People low down trapped in for 3 days until the waters dropped again. And one of the things that's not really spoken about a lot is the loss of the conservation habitat high up in the catchment. Football fields of forest just collapsed halfway down the mountain. The response, very much community-driven, community-led response, community rescue. The Channon Resilience setting up the hall, sending food up the valley, sending meds, doing health checks, and then us, the citizens, getting out our machines and fixing and repairing our own roads. Social impact, trauma, a lot of anxiety and fear, an element of anger and frustration with the authorities, guilt, a lot of guilt, especially for people high up. They suffered, but there's the people further down in the valley that they feel suffered more. And I think even now people still carry an element of that guilt. Strain on relationships, especially on multiple occupancies. But then the other side, people really did pull together, maybe where relationships have been fractured because of COVID, they were now starting to be repaired as the community is pulling together. And also a real concern for the natural environment. So focus areas going forward in relation to community resilience, I think everybody needs to start thinking about a flood plan. making sure they've prepared that emergency kit, connecting with neighbours, getting to know your neighbours, making sure you've joined the CB radio network. For people high up in the catchment thinking about avalanche, landslide training, that's a real risk to people up the top. Monitoring our health and well-being, and making sure that when you do share photos on social media, that you put the time and the date and the location on the pictures before you post them. We're going to update the Channon Hub with resources, so in the next couple of weeks you'll start to see more information going up there, and we'll email out with that information. And I think most importantly for this community is the emergency planning down in the Keerrong, making sure you've got your evacuation plans, that residents know which way to leave, because at different times the roads flood and get cut off at different points. And the new residents especially need to know where are those cut-offs and when do they happen and in what stages. Even considering an evacuation centre for this valley, and to make sure that you've identified your safe areas for your stock. A lot of people lost livestock. And just remember, we've got SES, Rouse and Lismore City Council in the room today. It's really important that you engage with the authorities and let them know what the requirements are from the community. And just remember, the maximum probable flood for Lismore is 15.9 metres. That's 1.5 metres higher than what we experienced in 2022. So it's really important that as a community we've got our plans in place and that we start thinking about how we're going to be resilient.
Thanks, Anna.